Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating aspects of George R.R. Martin's world, the tournament. But we're not just talking about any tournament. We're going to compare the wedding tourney at Whitewalls from the Mystery Night with the various tourneys we see throughout the main Game of Thrones timeline, particularly the Hands tourney and the legendary tourney at Harrenhal. What makes the Whitewalls tournament so different? Why does it matter? And what does it reveal about the evolution of tournaments as political tools in Westeros? By the end of this video, you'll understand why the tourney in the Mystery Night represents something fundamentally different from what we see in the main series, and why that difference tells us so much about power, conspiracy, and the nature of rebellion in the Seven Kingdoms. Let's start with the basics. When we think of tournaments in Game of Thrones, we immediately picture the Hands tourney from Season 1. King Robert orders this lavish spectacle to celebrate Ned Stark's appointment as Hand of the King. The prize purse is absolutely staggering. 40,000 gold dragons for the winner of the joust, 20,000 for the runner-up, 20,000 for the melee champion, and 10,000 for the archery winner. Ned Stark himself is appalled by the expense, knowing the realm is already drowning in debt. This tournament is pure spectacle, entertainment for the masses and the nobility alike. Sansa is enchanted by the shining armor, the great chargers, the pageantry of it all. It's meant to be seen, to be witnessed, to demonstrate power and wealth. Now contrast that with the wedding tourney at Whitewalls in 212 AC. Lord Ambrose Butterwell is supposedly celebrating his second marriage to a daughter of House Frey. The prize? A dragon egg, one that King Aegon IV had given to Butterwell's grandfather, possibly as compensation for bedding all three of his maiden daughters. Beyond that, 30 golden dragons for the loser of the final tilt, and 10 for knights defeated in the round before. It's a much more modest affair on the surface, at least in terms of prize money. There's only jousting, no melee, no archery contest, just the lists. Uther Underleaf explains to Dunk that it's essentially a bit of jousting to celebrate Lord Butterwell's nuptials, a tilt in the yard to mark the tilt between the sheets, as he crudely puts it. But here's where things get interesting. While the Hands tourney is exactly what it appears to be, a king showing off his wealth and honoring his new hand, Whitewalls is something else entirely. It's a mask, a pretense, a gathering that's using the acceptable social framework of a wedding tournament to hide something far more dangerous. As Egg himself realizes, this is a traitor's tourney. The tourney at Harrenhal falls somewhere in between these two extremes, and we'll get to that shortly. But understanding this spectrum is crucial to understanding how tournaments function as more than just entertainment in Westeros. Tournaments in Westeros serve multiple functions beyond simple martial display. They're economic engines, they're political gatherings, they're opportunities for social mobility, and they're stages for conspiracy. Let's break down each of these functions because understanding them helps us see why Whitewalls is so unique. First, the economic aspect. Tournaments are enormously expensive. As we learn from various sources, it can take a smaller house years to pay for a single tourney. The citizens of Norwich in medieval England once hosted a tournament that cost them approximately 5 years' wages for a skilled craftsman. When Lord Butterwell announces his tournament, the surrounding roads and inns become busy with travelers. Money flows, merchants profit, and the hosting lord demonstrates his wealth. But this also means tournaments are gatekeeping mechanisms. Only those who can afford the armor, the horses, the weapons, and the time to travel can participate in the list. Jousting specifically requires enormous wealth, expensive war horses, specialized armor, and lances that splinter on impact. This is why we see hedged knights like Sir Duncan struggling to even enter tournaments, and why the prospect of winning even 1 or 2 tilts and collecting ransoms could mean eating like kings for a year. Second, tournaments are social and political gatherings. They bring together lords and knights from across the realm who might otherwise never meet. Marriages are arranged, alliances are formed, grievances are aired, and information is exchanged. The feast at Harrenhal saw Starks, Baratheons, Martells, Danes, and countless other houses all gathered under one massive roof. At the Hands tourney, even though it was hastily organized on Robert's whim, knights came from all over to compete. These are rare opportunities for face-to-face interaction among the nobility, and in a world without rapid communication, that matters enormously. Third, Tournaments offer opportunities for advancement. Barristan Selmy famously entered a tournament as a 10-year-old mystery knight and was dubbed Barristan the Bold after being defeated and unmasked. Jorah Mormont won a tournament at Lannisport and gained the hand of Lyness Hightower. Criston Cole, the son of a steward, distinguished himself at the tournament celebrating Viserys the Reed's heir and eventually joined the King's Guard. For hedge knights and lesser nobility, tournaments are one of the few ways to gain fame, wealth, and potentially permanent employment. Dunk dreams of winning 10 dragons so he could buy egg-proper armor and a pavilion. Simple aspirations that reveal how precarious life is for wandering knights. But the fourth function is where things get truly interesting: tournaments as covers for conspiracy. This isn't unique to Whitewalls. The tourney at Harrenhal in 281 AC is widely believed to have been secretly arranged by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen to gather the Great Lords and address his father's madness, perhaps even to call for a forced abdication or regency. The massive prize purse offered by Lord Walter Went, 3 times larger than what Tywin Lannister had offered at Lannisport, was suspicious. Where did Went get that kind of money? The truth, we're told, is that Rhaegar provided the gold through Sir Oswell Went as a go-between. Rhaegar had no interest in the tourney as a tourney. His goal was political, to convene what amounted to an informal Great Council. King Aerys, paranoid as always, suspected something was wrong. Varys warned him that Rhaegar was using the event to gather support. And Aerys' paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded, even if his specific fears about the Knight of the Laughing Tree were misplaced. So what makes Whitewalls different from Harrenhal? Scale, execution, and desperation. The Second Blackfyre Rebellion that Whitewalls attempted to launch was far more amateur, far more constrained, and ultimately far more pathetic than anything Rhaegar might have planned. Let's set the scene. It's 212 AC, 16 years after the first Blackfyre Rebellion ended in blood at the Redgrass Field. Demon Eye Blackfyre and his twin sons are dead, killed in battle, but the Blackfyre cause isn't dead. Lord Gorman Peak, who lost 2 of his 3 castles for supporting the Black Dragon, is nursing his grievances. Many lords who fought for Demon were stripped of lands, titles, and wealth. Their children were taken to King's Landing as hostages to ensure loyalty, but most of those hostages died in the Great Spring Sickness. With the hostages gone, these lords were free to plot again, but they couldn't simply raise their banners and march. Bloodraven, the hand of the king to Aerys Targaryen, was too powerful, too watchful. They needed a pretext to gather, and Lord Butterwell's wedding provided exactly that. Enter Demon II Blackfyre, also known as John the Fiddler. He's the 3rd son of Demon the First, and unlike his warrior father and brothers, he's no great fighter. He's lean, handsome, charming, and he plays the fiddle. He also claims to have dragon dreams, prophetic visions that some Targaryens and their descendants experience. In Tyrosh, Demon dreamed that a dragon would be born at Whitewalls. Lord Peak heard of this dream and convinced Daemon to cross the narrow sea and make a play for the throne. But here's the problem: Bittersteel, Aegor Rivers, the most powerful Blackfyre supporter and founder of the Golden Company, thought Peak's plan was terrible. He didn't trust Daemon's dreams, and he refused to give Daemon the sword Blackfyre, the symbol of the house's legitimacy. So Daemon II was attempting this rebellion without the Golden Company support, without the ancestral sword, and with a plan that hinged entirely on him winning a dragon egg and somehow hatching it. The conspiracy was multi-layered. First, they convinced Butterwell to make his dragon egg the tournament's prize. Second, they rigged the tournament so that only Blackfyre supporters would advance to face Daemon, and those supporters would throw their matches to make Daemon look like a champion. Third, once Daemon won the egg and it miraculously hatched, they would reveal his true identity and the gathered lords would declare for him. It was an absurdly optimistic plan, and it fell apart almost immediately. The problem started when Sir Glendon Flowers, who claimed to be the son of the famous Quentin ball called Fireball, refused to take a bribe to lose his match. Glendon was desperate to prove his legitimacy and his worth, and he wouldn't compromise his honor for gold. When he defeated Sir Argrave the Defiant in a single tilt, it threw the conspiracy into chaos. Worse, Glendon started asking questions about why certain matches seemed fixed. Then there's Sir Duncan the Tall, who entered as the Mystery Gallows Knight and, despite losing to Sir Uther Underleaf, was observant enough to realize something was wrong when Uther showed him a gold coin minted during the Blackfyre Rebellion. Someone had paid Uther to kill Dunk during their match, though Uther refused. What's fascinating about comparing these tournaments is how they function as theater, as performances with carefully constructed meanings. At the Hands Tourney, the performance is straightforward. Robert is the magnanimous king honoring his dear friend. The knights are heroes performing deeds of valor. The ladies grant their favors, the crowds cheer, and it's all very much the idealized version of chivalry. Even when things go wrong, when Sir Hugh of the Vale dies with a lance through his throat, or when Gregor Clegane attacks Loras Tyrell in rage, these are seen as unfortunate accidents or individual failures, not systemic problems. At Harrenhal, the performance was more complex. On the surface, it was Lord Went celebrating his daughter's name day and showing off his impressive castle and fine sons. It was the greatest tourney in living memory, lasting 10 days with competitions in jousting, melee, archery, axe throwing, horse racing, singing, and mummery. The Queen of Love and Beauty started as Went's daughter, defended by her brothers and uncle, but the real performance was happening behind the scenes, in the tents and pavilions where lords discussed the madness of King Aerys. And then there was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, almost certainly Lyanna Stark, who entered the lists wearing mismatched armor and a shield bearing a weirwood with a laughing face. This mystery knight defeated 3 knights whose squires had attacked Howland Reed, demanding they teach their squires honor as ransom. When King Aerys ordered the knight unmasked and sent men to find him, including Prince Rhaegar, only the shield was ever found. The Knight of the Laughing Tree's performance was about justice, about defending the weak, about the old gods and northern honor. It was subversive theater that both delighted the commons and terrified the paranoid king. At Whitewalls, the performance was supposed to be simple, a wedding celebration, but everyone involved knew it was a lie. The tournament was a pretense from the beginning, and that's what made it so dangerous. When Duncan finally exposes Daemon's identity in the Great Hall, accusing him publicly and challenging the whole conspiracy, the performance collapses entirely. Daemon, to his credit, accepts a trial by combat, revealing himself by washing the black dye from his silver gold hair and displaying the 3-headed dragon of House Blackfyre on his horse's trappings. But by then, many of the wedding guests had already fled. The supposed Blackfyre supporters, these lords who had gathered under false pretenses, weren't actually willing to fight for Daemon when it came down to it. When Bloodraven arrived with his army, Daemon tried to rally the men inside Whitewalls with a speech, but they had no intention of fighting a hopeless battle. Daemon then rode out alone to challenge Bloodraven to single combat, a desperate act of bravery or foolishness. Bloodraven simply had him arrested. One of the most revealing aspects of the Whitewalls conspiracy is how it exposes the economic limitations of rebellion in Westeros. The first Blackfyre Rebellion could happen because Daemon Forage had genuine support from major houses, even if they were lesser houses, and because he had Bittersteel, Aegor Rivers, one of the most formidable military minds in the realm. He had the sword Blackfyre, a powerful symbol, and he had enough strength to fight a pitched battle at the Red Grass Field that, by some accounts, could have gone either way until Bloodraven's archers killed Daemon and his sons. The Second Blackfyre Rebellion, by contrast, was Poverty Rebellion. It couldn't afford open warfare, it couldn't afford to raise banners, and it couldn't even afford to let its champion fight honestly in a tournament. The fact that they needed to rig the list, bribing opponents to throw their matches, tells you everything about how weak this conspiracy was. They were betting everything on a miracle, on a dragon egg somehow hatching, because they didn't have the resources for a real war. Compare this to the resources on display at the Hands Tourney. 40,000 gold dragons as a prize is an obscene amount of money, and Robert orders it casually, not caring that the realm is millions in debt. Or consider Harrenhal, where Lord Went, or really Prince Rhaegar through Went, offered prizes 3 times larger than Tywin Lannister's already lavish Lannisport tourney. These are displays of real power, the kind of wealth that could fund armies if needed. What's interesting is that even within Whitewalls, there are clear class distinctions among the competitors. Hedge knights like Dunk, Kyle the cat and Maynard Plum are scrambling for any prize money, 10 gold dragons would be life-changing for them. They're camping in hedges, sleeping rough, and hoping an innkeeper might sell them food. Meanwhile, Sir Glendon Flowers, despite being a bastard, has better armor and a warhorse, though his armor is missing a visor, a dangerous oversight for jousting. And then there are the lords and their household knights who have full plate, proper pavilions, and servants. The tournament literally embodies the economic hierarchy of Westerosi society. One of the most romantic elements of Westerosi tournaments is the tradition of mystery knights, competitors who conceal their identities behind closed helms and either blank shields or strange devices. This tradition is ancient, going back at least to the Age of Heroes if the stories are true, and it serves multiple narrative and practical functions in Martin's world. Mystery knights allow for social mobility and rule breaking. Barristan Selmy, as a 10-year-old squire, couldn't officially enter a tournament, but as a mystery knight, he could. Lyanna Stark, as a woman, couldn't joust, but as the Knight of the Laughing Tree she could. Demon II Blackfyre, as an exiled pretender, couldn't openly enter Butterwell's tournament, but as John the Fiddler he could. Duncan the Tall, worried about being recognized after the incident at Ashford, entered as the Gallows Knight. The Mystery Knight tradition creates a space where the rules of society are temporarily suspended, where identity becomes fluid and anything seems possible. But Mystery Knights also create paranoia and fear among those in power. King Aerys II at Harrenhal was convinced the Knight of the Laughing Tree was mocking him, laughing at him, and he obsessed over unmasking this perceived enemy. He even decided, with no evidence, that it must be Sir Jaime Lannister, who he'd sent back to King's Landing, defying his orders. The Mystery Knight's shield, with its laughing weirwood face, haunted Aerys, feeding his paranoia. Similarly, in The Mystery Knight, various characters try to figure out who the Gallows Knight really is, and there's an undercurrent of suspicion about what the Mystery Knight might be hiding. What's particularly clever about how Martin uses Mystery Knights at Whitewalls is that there are multiple layers of hidden identity. Daemon is disguised as John the Fiddler, but John the Fiddler is also technically a Mystery Knight in that his true identity is concealed. Duncan is the Gallows Knight, hiding both his recent notoriety from Ashford and his connection to Egg. And there's even Sir Maynard Plum, who's subtly suggested to be Bloodraven himself in disguise, gathering intelligence on the conspiracy. The tournament becomes a hall of mirrors where everyone is pretending to be someone else, which perfectly reflects the political situation where everyone is pretending the gathering is about a wedding rather than treason. One of the central tensions in The Mystery Knight is between the ideals of chivalry and the brutal realities of power politics. Sir Glendon Flowers represents the idealistic view. He believes that a knight's honor is worth more than gold or political advantage. When offered a bribe to lose his match against Daemon, Glendon refuses, even though he's poor and desperate to prove himself. He fights honestly, and when he's framed for stealing the dragon egg, he maintains his innocence despite torture. When he finally gets his chance for vindication in a trial by combat against Daemon, he defeats the pretender in a single tilt, unhorsing him spectacularly and sending him into a pool of dirty water, which earns Daemon the unfortunate nickname the Brown Dragon. Duncan represents a more complex view of honor. He's deeply invested in the ideals of knighthood, in the lessons Sir Arlan of Pennytree taught him, but he's also practical enough to recognize when those ideals conflict with reality. He enters a tournament under false colors, he befriends people while keeping secrets, and he ultimately chooses to expose the conspiracy not because of abstract principle, but because he realizes the danger to Egg, his squire who's actually a prince. Duncan's honor is situational and protective rather than absolute. By contrast, the Blackfyre conspirators represent the complete corruption of chivalric ideals. They're rigging tournaments, framing innocent knights, attempting murder, and plotting rebellion under the cover of celebrating a wedding. They're using the language and structure of chivalry, the tournament, the knightly orders, the oaths of loyalty, but hollowing out all the meaning. Lord Gorman Peake, the architect of the conspiracy, lost his castles because he supported Daemon I, and now he's willing to sacrifice anyone, including Daemon II, to get revenge and restore his house's fortunes. The Blackfyre cause, which might have had some legitimate grievances in its first iteration, has degenerated into bitter old men manipulating a young dreamer. This corruption is also visible in how the tournament's rules are bent and broken. Matches are fixed, bribes are offered, and when those tactics fail, they resort to framing Glendon for theft using planted evidence. This isn't how tournaments are supposed to work. In theory, the lists are a place of honest competition where skill and valor are tested. The ransom system, where defeated knights must pay to reclaim their horses and armor, is supposed to be about risk and reward, not about ensuring only certain people advance. What the Whitewalls conspirators are doing is turning the tournament into a puppet show, and that ultimately contributes to their failure because it's so obviously false that even relatively unsophisticated observers like Duncan can see through it. The dragon egg at the center of the Whitewalls conspiracy deserves special attention because it operates on multiple symbolic levels. First, it's literally valuable, one of the last dragon eggs in Westeros after the dragons died out during the Dance of Dragons. Butterwell's grandfather received it from King Aegon IV, probably as hush money after the king impregnated his 3 virgin daughters. The egg represents Targaryen power, or rather, the memory of Targaryen power, since there haven't been living dragons for decades. Second, the egg is symbolic of legitimacy and destiny. Daemon II believed his prophetic dream that a dragon would be born at Whitewalls meant that if he won the egg, it would hatch for him, proving his right to rule. In Targaryen and Valyrian culture, dragons chose their riders, and a new dragon hatching would be a sign from the gods or fate that Daemon was the true king. This is why the conspirators were willing to rig an entire tournament just to ensure Daemon won it, because they believed, or wanted others to believe, that the dragon egg hatching would change everything. Third, the egg is a MacGuffin in the narrative sense, a valuable object that drives the plot but whose actual importance is less than what characters believe. The real dragon that was born at Whitewalls, as Bloodraven cryptically notes at the end, was Egg, Prince Aegon, who emerged from his submissive squire role to command lords and take charge of the situation. Daemon the Younger dreamed of a dragon being born, and he was right, but it wasn't a literal dragon and it wasn't a Blackfyre dragon, it was a Targaryen prince coming into his own power. Fourth, the egg's theft and the framing of Glendon shows how the conspirators are willing to destroy the very symbol they claim to revere in order to maintain their plot. When Glendon won't take a bribe, they frame him by planting the egg in his possessions, then claiming it's been stolen. But the egg that's found is actually a painted stone, a fake. The real dragon egg is still missing. This might seem like a plot hole, but it's actually revealing. The Blackfyre supporters are so desperate and disorganized that they're working at cross purposes. Some genuinely believe in Daemon's dream and want him to win the real egg. Others, like Peake, just want to use the conspiracy for their own ends and don't care about the egg's authenticity. The fake egg represents the fake rebellion, all show and no substance. One crucial difference between the Whitewalls tournament and earlier tourneys is the presence of a sophisticated intelligence network. Lord Brynden Rivers, called Bloodraven, serves as hand of the king to Aerys First, and he's built a spy network that permeates the realm. He has 1,000 eyes in one, agents everywhere who report to him. At Whitewalls, Bloodraven has multiple informants among the conspirators, including, the story strongly suggests, Sir Maynard Plum himself. This is a relatively new development in Westerosi governance. Yes, there have always been spies and informants. Varys himself tells us as much. But Bloodraven systematized it, made it into an institution. This is why the Second Blackfyre Rebellion failed before it could truly begin. The conspirators thought they were being clever, using a wedding as cover, but Bloodraven knew about their plans the entire time. He was waiting, gathering evidence, and when the moment was right, he appeared outside Whitewalls with overwhelming force. This surveillance state changes the nature of tournaments as gathering places. At Harrenhal, lords could meet and discuss sensitive political matters with some expectation of privacy. It was still dangerous. Aerys attended in person precisely because he was paranoid about what might be planned, but the infrastructure to truly monitor everyone wasn't in place yet. By Whitewalls, that's changed. Any conversation might be overheard, any letter might be intercepted, any ally might be an informant. This makes conspiracy exponentially harder, which is why the Blackfyre cause never really recovered after the Second Rebellion's failure. What's interesting is that Bloodraven doesn't just arrest everyone immediately. He lets the tournament proceed, lets the conspiracy unfold, presumably to identify all the participants and gather ironclad evidence of treason. It's only when Duncan publicly exposes Daemon's identity and things spiral out of control that Bloodraven makes his move. This calculated patience is characteristic of Bloodraven. He's willing to wait, to watch, to let his enemies expose themselves before striking. Let's return to comparing the physical scale of these tournaments because it tells us a lot about what they represent. The Hand's Tourney in King's Landing is held in the capital city, the seat of power, with the king and his court in attendance. Thousands of people can watch, the surrounding city is full of visitors, and the tournament becomes a spectacle for the entire realm to hear about. It's centralized, official, and very public. Harrenhal was even more massive. The tourney was held at the largest castle in Westeros, beneath the walls of Black Heron's cursed fortress. It lasted 10 days, with 7 days of actual competition. Hundreds of knights participated and thousands more attended as spectators. It had multiple competitions running simultaneously, jousts in the morning, melee in the afternoon, archery, and other contests throughout. The feast in the Hall of 100 Hearths could accommodate vast numbers of people. This wasn't just a tournament, it was a gathering of the entire realm's nobility, possibly the last time so many great lords would be in one place before Robert's rebellion tore the kingdoms apart. Whitewalls, by contrast, is intimate and claustrophobic. It's a relatively new castle, only about 40 years old, called the Milk House by small folk because of its white walls. It's in the middle of nowhere near the God's Eye, not a major seat of power. The tournament itself is small, just jousting, no melee or other events. The guest list is carefully curated, mostly Blackfyre supporters and those with grievances against Bloodraven. Even though Lord Butterwell tries to make it grand, serving good wine and putting on a feast, there's a sense of it being a minor provincial affair rather than a realm-wide event. This difference in scale reflects the difference in power between the crown and the Blackfyre conspirators. Robert can order a massive tournament on a whim because he's the king, even if it bankrupts the realm. Rhaegar could secretly fund Harrenhal because he's the crown prince with access to vast resources. The Blackfyres can only manage a small, out-of-the-way gathering because they're exiles and rebels with limited resources. The size of your tournament literally reflects the size of your power base. The consequences of these tournaments vary wildly, which tells us something about their nature and purpose. The Hand's Tourney ends with minor scandal, Sir Hugh's suspicious death, Gregor's rage, Loras awarding victory to Sandor Clegane, but no major political consequences. It serves its purpose as entertainment and distraction, and life goes on. The real political action happens elsewhere, in Ned's investigation into Jon Arryn's death, not in the tournament itself. Harrenhal's aftermath was catastrophic, though not immediately because of the tournament. The scandal of Rhaegar crowning Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, passing over his own wife, Elia Martell, became legendary. Combined with the mystery of the Night of the Laughing Tree and Aerys's paranoia, it poisoned relationships between major houses. When Rhaegar subsequently abducted or ran away with Lyanna less than a year later, it sparked Robert's rebellion. The tournament didn't cause the rebellion directly, but it was a stage where crucial encounters happened, where Rhaegar saw Lyanna, where Aerys's madness was displayed to all the realm, where tensions that had been building for years finally became visible. Whitewalls' aftermath was swift and brutal. Bloodraven arrested Daemon II, executed or punished the Lord conspirators, and then razed Whitewalls to the ground. The castle was destroyed specifically to prevent it from becoming a shrine to the Blackfyre cause. Lord Butterwell survived, kept his wife, but lost his magnificent new castle and probably significant lands and wealth. Daemon II himself was kept alive as a prisoner for several years, not out of mercy, but because Bloodraven didn't want Bittersteel to be able to crown another Blackfyre pretender immediately. Only after Daemon II's death could Haegon Blackfyre be crowned and the Third Blackfyre Rebellion begin. What's significant is that the tournament itself became evidence of treason. Everyone who attended and didn't immediately report the conspiracy was complicit. Bloodraven didn't even need to prove anyone drew swords or made explicit oaths. The mere fact of gathering under false pretenses at a rigged tournament was enough. This sets a dangerous precedent for future tournaments. If the Crown decides a gathering is seditious, the participants can be punished simply for attending. Ultimately, comparing the Whitewalls tournament to the others reveals fundamental truths about how power works in Westeros. Power isn't just about military strength or noble birth. It's about the ability to gather people, to create spectacles, to manipulate symbols, and to control narratives. The Hand's Tourney shows us royal power at its most casual and wasteful. Robert doesn't need the tournament to prove anything. He's already king. He hosts it because he wants to, because he can, because he likes tournaments and doesn't care about the cost. It's power as consumption and display, power that doesn't even have to justify itself. Harrenhal shows us royal power in crisis. Rhaegar needed to gather the lords to address his father's madness, but he couldn't do it openly. He had to use the cover of a tournament, had to work through intermediaries, had to make it look like Lord Went's idea. Even as Crown Prince, there were limits to his power, constraints imposed by his mad father and the political situation. The tournament was power trying to organize itself against a greater, more erratic power. Whitewalls shows us the complete absence of real power. The Blackfyre conspirators had grievances, they had some loyal supporters, they had a pretender with royal blood, but they didn't have armies, they didn't have wealth, they didn't have popular support, and they didn't have competent leadership. All they had was desperation and a vague hope that magic would save them. The tournament was a fantasy, a pretense, a cargo cult ritual where they went through the motions hoping that if they just performed the ceremony correctly, legitimacy and power would somehow materialize. The fact that Bloodraven could end the Second Blackfyre Rebellion before it truly began, simply by showing up with an army, demonstrates the gulf between real power and the illusion of power. Daemon 2 rode out alone to challenge Bloodraven to single combat, a dramatic gesture straight out of the songs and stories, and Bloodraven just had him arrested. No duel, no climactic battle, no trial by combat to determine the right. Just arrest, imprisonment, and eventually execution. The tournament, which was supposed to launch a rebellion, became the rebellion's grave instead. So what have we learned from comparing these tournaments? First, that tournaments in Westeros are never just tournaments. They're always about something else: politics, conspiracy, power, legitimacy. Second, that the scale and nature of a tournament reflects the power of those hosting or using it. Third, that the tradition of Mystery Nights creates spaces for subversion and rule breaking, but also for paranoia and surveillance. And fourth, that by the time of the Mystery Night, the nature of power in Westeros has changed. Bloodraven's spy network has made the kind of gathering Rhaegar attempted at Harrenhal much more dangerous for potential conspirators. The wedding tourney at Whitewalls is fascinating precisely because it's such a failure. It shows us what happens when people without real power try to use the mechanisms of power anyway. It's a traitor's tourney, but the traitors are mostly sad old men clinging to lost causes, manipulated by the ambitious, and led by a dreamer who confused prophecy with planning. Compared to the spectacle of the Hand's Tourney or the legend of Harrenhal, Whitewalls seems almost pathetic, but that's what makes it so revealing about the true nature of power, conflict, and rebellion in the Seven Kingdoms. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know what other aspects of the Dunk and Egg stories you'd like me to explore. And remember, in Westeros, every tournament tells a story, but you have to look past the lances and armor to see what's really happening. See you next time.